we begin with a question, and the question is it America's greatest epidemic? Or maybe we would say, is it the world's greatest epidemic? And what are we talking about, Greg? Okay, Greg doesn't remember what it is, and I was hoping he would because, I don't know, I'm not sure I remember either. I hope it's in the next slide. Oh, this is about memory, Greg.
That's right, it's about memory.
Okay.
I'm trying to get that.
Yeah, we're of course playing with you a little bit here. But this is a study that came out about 4 years ago now from our Centers for Disease Control, an interview of a representative sample of the United States involving some 60,000 people. And they looked at those over 60 years of age, and they found that roughly 1 in 8 reported increased confusion or memory loss in the preceding 12 months. When I looked at this study, Greg, I said, well, you know, over 60, that includes people that are over 90, over 100. Maybe the reason that figure was so high is because it's just those people that are, you know, in the far extremes of experience that have the memory difficulties.
Right. But the study actually showed that even in those who are basically 60 to 70 years old, the percentages were about the same.
That's exactly right. So the whole point here is at a relatively young age, people are having more and more problems with recall and with memory. Shortly after that study came out, I was invited to speak to a group of professionals in Portugal. And so as I was preparing to go over there, I said, well, they won't care about U.S. statistics. I wonder if it's any different in Portugal. And basically, it's very similar.
It was almost identical.
That's exactly right.
Very,
Yeah, so we're
very similar.
talking, what?
12%. You can see in urban dwellers, actually higher in rural dwellers. A little bit higher, 17% almost of those people in that study had cognitive impairment, meaning that they had trouble with their memory, trouble with their judgment a little bit, these various parameters.
But probably the thing we want to highlight, because we're going to be spending probably the most time on this presentation with this, is the second bullet point there, and that is cerebrovascular disease. That's disease of the blood vessels going to the brain, seem to account for almost the majority of the problems with memory and cognition. So there's going to be a number of things that we look at in this presentation, but we've got to talk about the blood vessels. We have to talk about one of the main risk factors for that too, which just happens to be high blood pressure. So what about those who are too young to have cognitive impairment, Greg? Can they just leave right now? Can Josiah just go home and say, Daddy, it's time to leave?
I'm sure we could set up a scenario with Josiah where his memory was impaired, you know? Keep him up too long. Dad give him a whole bunch of stressful assignments that he can't do. You know, don't feed him very well. We could definitely produce a situation where his memory was starting to fail him a little bit.
So
even at a young age.
So there's basically lifestyle situations that actually can predispose you to cognitive problems. And many of you may already realize this, but if you're not sleeping adequately, you can't encode memories properly. So to retain memories requires adequate sleep. That's where you store memory. Well, fatigue is a problem too, isn't it?
Absolutely. Fatigue is, I think, one of the biggest problems we have in America, where we sit too much and we are up too late and we don't get enough exercise. Each year, approximately 40,000 non-fatal injuries, 1,500 fatalities from driver drowsiness, right? Inadequate sleep, overwork is a major problem in America. We overwork way too much, even still. Increased accidents on the graveyard shift. You know, I work in a hospital where nurses and doctors and many other workers are working the night shift, you know. And it's amazing how often it is that the various workers don't get enough or don't even get any sleep
Really?
the day before. So they had to live life in some way, do things, and they come to their night shift, and they're supposed to have had at least a couple hours of sleep, and they sometimes can get that. But there's times where they're going all night. They're just pulling an all-nighter, doing their shift. Haven't you met those folks if you work in a hospital or in that kind of setting where you're a police force or something like that? And so we live in a world where it's easy to be up 24/7. Unless we prioritize sleep, it's going to flee away from us.
Yeah, and it will really impair your cognition. So if you haven't found that out, your cognition is probably more impaired than you realize.
And in fact, at 18 hours, if you've been up for longer than 18 hours, your reaction time and the various parameters of your brain ability is equivalent to having a blood alcohol level of 0.1%, which is above the legal limit of driving.
So let's talk about some of these categories of cognitive robbers. We've spoken some about the last one, some of these lifestyle issues, but we have to talk about mental health issues as well as the vascular causes, like we briefly alluded to, like stroke. And then there's the neurodegenerative diseases, things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Greg, why don't you help us look at one of the big mental health compromisers?
Yeah, depression. So it's a very common, 350 million people worldwide, nearly 1 million suicides every year, 20 million attempts. 10 to 20% of women who have just had a baby have depression. Very high. Each year, about 6.7% of U.S. adults experience a major depressive disorder of some kind. Average age of onset is 32 years of age. It's much more common in women, but it's common in men as well. However, 3.3% of 13 to 18-year-olds even have the problem. And so depression is very common in our society and a major factor with fatigue and cognitive changes.
Yeah, for some years they didn't really nail down this connection between memory problems and depression, although it may seem obvious today. But back in 1995, researchers were looking at the literature, so now some 20 years ago, and basically made the conclusion that may seem quite obvious, but you always want to have data for your conclusions. You just don't want to draw conclusions without evidence. But they said here, significant, stable association between depression and memory impairment. What that is just saying in medicalese is that it's very consistent. If you're depressed, your memory is not going to function as well. And actually, there are many people with untreated depression who don't even realize they're depressed. So this is significant. So
yeah, some of the symptoms of depression, sleep difficulties, either too much sleep or not enough, changes in interest in the things that you usually are interested in, feeling excessive guilt or worthlessness, feeling a lack of value, lack of energy, mood depression, feeling like your mood is down, concentration changes, feeling kind of slow and sluggish, or even not even realizing it yourself, but your family is noticing, man, you are sure talking and moving so slow lately. These kinds of changes are very important to notice, and they are symptoms of depression.
So what would you say is the cornerstone of depression therapy?
If you go to a doctor typically and they address depression and they put you on treatment, what treatments do they usually give you in general terms? Medications, and what's the other main thing? Counseling, yeah, or psychotherapy, or whatever you want to call it. And so those are the cornerstone in the average medical world, but we say that ought not to be. That in fact, lifestyle is very powerful to improve your mood, Studies show that, for example, let's take exercise. Vigorous or even moderate exercise is as powerful as medication to improve mood.
One of the great things about exercise, too, is if you're dealing with kind of the other end of the spectrum, which is excessive anxiety, although you can have anxiety and depression go together, but exercise has a regulating effect on the brain. If it's overstimulated, exercise tends to bring it down. If it's depressed, exercise tends to bring it up. So one of the most powerful things you can do for mental health is be on a daily exercise program. Now, we were told that we have special permission to give you, what do they call that, a special dispensation today, because you've been sitting in the lectures. But still, it would be good. If you haven't done any exercise today already, if when you went home, you, instead of just sitting down, maybe took a walk. You get the picture? So what other things are on the list, Greg?
You know, a whole plant-based diet, vegan diet is a term. And, the more omega-3 fatty acids you get, such as ground flaxseed or walnuts, many of the nuts are higher in omega-3. The more tryptophan you get, tryptophan is high in pumpkin seeds and nuts again. Calcium, there's a number of components of a healthy whole plant-based diet that improve mood. And there's a number of components in a traditional standard American diet that worsen mood. Heavy meat, red meat intake especially, has components in it that can worsen your mood. And I believe that's the case. The fattiness of some of those rich foods makes your circulation sluggish in the brain, and the ability for those little red blood cells to get to those tiny little capillaries is compromised in the brain. And so that's very important that we consider improving our diet if we have mood struggles.
Yeah, not only does fat have that connection that Greg just mentioned, but most people don't think about this, but there's a large amount of fat in your brain. In fact, the way neurotransmitters, nerve messengers work is they have to interface with the nerve cell membranes, okay? Well, those membranes are made up in part by fat. Now, if you eat plant fats, those polyunsaturated fats, they tend to be in what state at room temperature?
Liquid.
That's right. Did I hear someone say liquid? That's exactly right. They tend to be liquid. Now, this is especially for Josiah, and you can get help from Mila. What about saturated fats? What state are they in at room temperature?
Solid.
Speak up. Solid. Did you know that, or did you just listen to someone who gave you the answer?
I guess.
You guessed.
He guessed
Good guess.
before he was hinted to.
That was right. They are solid. Now, the reason why, I'm going to give you just some real quick chemistry, is the saturated fat molecules are very straight. They're very flat. They stack very easily. They make rigid membranes. The polyunsaturated fats are very kinky, very curved, so they make very fluid membranes and very fluid fats. Why this is significant is if you're eating a high animal product diet, those saturated fats are incorporated into your brain cells, and then the nerve transmitters don't work as well when they try to interact with those rigid brain cell membranes. When the brain cells are made up of polyunsaturated fats, when the membranes are not so rigid, the neurotransmitters can interact with those membranes more effectively.
And that plays a role with insulin resistance as well. We're starting to talk about type 3 diabetes. Have you heard about this? Alzheimer's dementia, type 3 diabetes, where insulin resistance seems to be one of the key components to Alzheimer's dementia now that we're really understanding this more thoroughly. And the more fluid your membranes are, the less trouble your brain cells have taking up glucose, and the better they do, the less risk of dementia you'll have with Alzheimer's.
Now, we don't want to stress you out, but we want to encourage you to try to remember this list here. And this list is not exhaustive because on the next page we've got another list of things that can all help, natural lifestyle things that can help you to either prevent or treat depression. We've touched on some of them already, and again, we don't want to stress you out, but try to remember this list. We don't want to put any pressure on you, okay? Now, the reason I'm making a point of this is because the program that we talk about for high blood pressure, the so-called no pressure program, those 10 elements that help lower your blood pressure also help to prevent depression. Okay? It's the same program. You don't have to say, oh, well, I'd like to follow your program, Dr. Steinke and DeRose, for blood pressure, but I have to be on a special lifestyle for depression. No, it's the same program, isn't it, Greg?
They're surprisingly similar. It's amazing how what's good for your body and your brain is amazingly good for your blood vessels too, because your brain needs your blood vessels.
So if you want more on depression, we recommend Dr. Nedley's book, Depression: The Way Out. It's a very good resource that walks you through a lifestyle approach to depression. But we want to hasten on to the vascular and neurodegenerative diseases, and the one that we really want to highlight is stroke, because it's often not on the list. Most people, when they talk about cognitive changes, they're thinking, well, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, but stroke actually, as far as the number of lives and brains that it claims, probably even more profound than Alzheimer's, because if you think about it, Alzheimer's typically strikes very late in life. People don't typically live for decades after getting Alzheimer's, but with a stroke they can. And so as far as compromised years of life, we have to put stroke very high on the list. And we talk about this a lot, Greg, and why is that?
Because I think it's the most devastating complication of high blood pressure. And it doesn't have to be devastating in a quick way, though, right? It can be very slowly, agonizingly devastating to a person as they get microstroke after microstroke after microstroke after microstroke, and not even realize that their brain function is just deteriorating. Many times we call it step down. You see the person, your loved ones like this, and then suddenly they're just down a little bit and just not quite the same level of cognition. And you're like, something's different. And that can be small strokes that you don't necessarily pick up and take the person to the emergency room for.
So basically, very important topic, because high blood pressure can not only contribute to strokes, but we're now learning that even if you never had a stroke, even one of these mini strokes, you still, if your blood pressure is running high, will have an accelerated loss of cognitive function over time. This has been shown in many populations. Here's a study, actually very recent, published this year, among African Americans, and among these individuals you can see the higher systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood vessel values showed actually faster progression of cognitive deficits. So they had poorer scores on computerized testing of brain function over time.
And you know, David, I've had a patient come into the hospital multiple times, same patient.
Mm-hmm.
Blood pressure goes too high, they get confused, the family gets worried, bring them in, their blood pressure is 220 over 120, and the ER physician's like, you know what, the patient's too confused, blood pressure is too high, we need to get them in the hospital, bring down the blood pressure. We use strong medicines to suddenly bring it down, and voila, the patient's mind comes right back. Amazing. High blood pressure can be devastating for your sense of whereabouts, can cause a lot of confusion in certain people.
So like Greg is saying, some of these things are reversible, but others are not. And so it's important to be very serious about blood pressure. This is another study, again, from a different population. We looked at African bloodlines. Now we look at European bloodlines. This is from the Netherlands. And you can see, again, basically the very same story. So progression of cognitive deficits, especially in the memory realm. And what they put here is, especially when you look at the implications of high blood pressure, their last bullet point, decline evolves gradually, possibly opening a window for early intervention. So, Greg, what can a person do for high blood pressure and stroke risk?
No pressure.
That's right. So some of you were with us Thursday night, and we began kind of walking people through this mnemonic. We wanted to just give you, like in a minute or two, a few high points from things that some of you have heard us present already. Nutrition. If we were to put up one slide, it was a slide that Greg reminded me of earlier today about my great lecture that changed someone's life without anything I ever said.
That's right. Yeah, that was a great quote. You know, that someone came up to him and said, "I loved your lecture, but it was nothing you said." And he was just really thrown back by that. And the person stopped right there. And then what did he say next?
He said it was life-changing, and the thing that changed his life was this slide.
This graph right here.
This graph.
That's right. Take a look at this. Really try to understand what this is saying right now on this slide. Here you have Adventist Health Study 2 data, 90,000 people almost. On the left side where it says 1, 0.8, 0.6, this is their risk of getting the illness. So you have a 20% less risk if you're at 0.8. You have a 80% less risk if you're at 0.2, okay? So as it goes down. Notice that depending on the kind of diet you have, your risk of diabetes and high blood pressure changes significantly. So the non-vegetarians were kind of the most risk, one. They were the kind of comparison group. And then when you compare non-vegetarians to semi-vegetarians, people who eat red meat, poultry, and fish less than once a week, they had about what is that, about a 30% less risk of both diabetes and high blood pressure. Pesco-vegetarians, those who eat fish and eat a plant-based diet otherwise, had about 40% less risk of hypertension and maybe about 55% less risk of diabetes. Lacto-ovo-vegetarians were the ones who eat eggs and dairy and a whole plant-based diet on top of that. They had, for hypertension, what is that, about 60% reduced risk, and for diabetes, a little bit more than that reduced risk. And then look at the vegans. Very interesting. When this first came out, this was not obvious to me or many others, that the vegans have the most reduction in risk. A whole plant-based diet is the best, according to Adventist Health Study 2. They have an 80% reduced risk of hypertension and diabetes, and the men especially feel that even more than the ladies.
Okay. I always thought it was just kind of a gimmick, you know, to have those women pointing to charts and stuff on those game shows. But it's much easier to walk up and point to something than it is, you know, using one of these pointers. So, but I think they could dress nicer anyway. We talked about social support, and social support is something we discussed in our presentation Thursday night, for those of you who were there. And suffice it to say, we've touched on it a number of times today, the importance of relationships in lowering blood pressure. What we didn't speak about Thursday that we wanted to tell you about, because it's important both for blood pressure and for brain health, is your choice of beverages. Now, I don't want to give any clues, but there is one beverage that's much better than any other. It is true. You can hear me better with the mic. But there is one beverage that stands head and shoulders above all the others. It is not alcohol, is it, Greg?
You know, alcohol doesn't come out very well with blood pressure. Alcohol, more than 3 drinks at a time, raises the blood pressure significantly. Binge drinking is a real big problem for blood pressure. We've seen that a number of times in the emergency department. Moderate drinking is also a problem. Interferes with the medications that people take, causes side effects of blood pressure medicines to be worse, and it increases weight. Alcohol also messes with your willpower, and so other varying characteristics that you might be struggling with that raise blood pressure, you're going to do a worse job with alcohol on board.
Actually, alcohol, of course, has intrinsic properties that undermine brain function. In one of the lectures we gave on Thursday earlier in the day, we talked about a compound called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's a brain growth compound that helps prevent Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And if you're drinking, using alcohol, even moderately, that upsets the levels of this important brain health-giving compound. Studies show that people who are social drinkers have impaired cognition over time. So really, avoiding the alcohol is best for your blood pressure. It's also best for avoiding other diseases like cancer, but we are going to skip over that to hasten on, unless Greg wants to make a few more points about it.
The one point I'll make about brain-derived neurotrophic factor is, as they've been studying this, again, exercise is so amazing to improve your brain's ability to make more neurons, to form neurons, especially in your hippocampus. You know what that is for? Your memory. And your frontal lobe, which has to do with your judgment and your decision-making capacity. And so you're a better decision maker. You're a better liver of life if you're engaging in regular exercise because your brain is functioning better. So don't neglect that. Don't think that that's not important, because it is, especially in the sedentary society that we find ourselves in today.
Okay, and if you want some more of that on BDNF, we talk about that in detail in this DVD called The Brain Health Revolution. Well, back to beverages and blood pressure. How many of you think, since alcohol is so bad, we should just stick with the soft drinks? Any of you want to go in that direction? Now, soft drinks are part of the problem, too. You well know that. And part of it has to do with this whole relationship between insulin and metabolism, because weight gain and metabolic processes are undermined by the sugar-containing beverages. In fact, the leading source of sugar in the American diet is actually, at least added sugar, is sweetened soft drinks. Nearly half our calories of added sugar in the American diet come from this source. Wasn't all that long ago, Greg, had a patient in my office, and he told me he made one lifestyle change, and he had lost some 60 pounds in a year. Who would like to guess what that lifestyle change was? That's right, he got rid of his sodas. That was it.
Yeah, your patient did better than mine. You know, she came in drinking 2-liter bottles of Sprite a day. She just carried it around, just swigging on it all day.
And so did she change or not?
I asked her to make that one change, and she came back about 3-4 months later and had lost 40 pounds.
Really?
She didn't do anything else different. Nothing. Everything else was identical. She just switched to water and was sipping on water all day, and she had lost all that weight. She was amazed. She had no idea that it had that much of an impact.
When I'm traveling, I'm often staying in hotels, and I was in a hotel a little while ago, and someone, I don't know why they tend to like to leave these things around, but there was a beer can there, and I picked it up. It was empty, of course, and I looked. It was a light beer. You know how many calories were in that light beer? Well, it was just a can. It was 12 ounces? Is that what a can is? Over 100 calories. In the course of a year, just an extra 100 calories would put on 10 pounds. That's a light beer. I mean, the The alcoholic beverages and the sugar-sweetened beverages are contributing to this epidemic of obesity, and how that impacts our metabolism is definitely significant, because when you mess up how insulin works, that messes up brain function. And we could talk a lot more about that. We will give you a chance for some questions and answers before we finish. So, Greg, I think the solution is diet soft drinks, right?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I had the opportunity several years back to do a study with the Adventist Health Study, and I looked at soft drinks and diabetes, which is very similar to the vascular issue here. And we struggled a lot with whether diet soft drinks, because the relative risk is quite high. It's like 2, so it's double the risk when you drink diet soft drinks. And we struggled to figure out if perhaps there was a causative issue there. And one of the ideas that was really being contemplated pretty heavily in the medical literature, and we talked about it amongst our research group, was, do diet soft drinks change your desire for food in between a meal so that you eat more? Because we found that even though there was no calories in the diet soft drink, that people tended to have more weight, they tended to be more likely to have diabetes, and so we were wondering if it changed your metabolism in a way that was unnatural because of all the stimulation of the sweetener that was calorie-free.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting questions. What we do know, even though there's still many unanswered questions, is that if you do use more of these diet soft drinks, you will increase your risk of vascular events like stroke and heart attack. So diet soft drinks are not the solution. Some people say, well, could that be because of the caffeine that's in many of these? And that could be part of it, because caffeine is a problem, isn't it, Greg?
Caffeine is the most common addictive substance used in our society, right? 85% of Americans use caffeine. And yet caffeine raises your blood pressure. You can see right here a quote that we look on the caffeine's effect on blood pressure. Reviews of caffeine's acute effect on blood pressure indicates changes of 3 to 15 millimeters of mercury systolic and 4 to 13 millimeters of mercury diastolic. Typically, blood pressure changes occur within 30 minutes and peak 1 to 2 hours and persist for 4 hours. And so caffeine, whether it's coffee or Mountain Dew or Coke or any of the other substances, you know, they're putting it in various other substances now. I've seen products where they're starting to add caffeine to a number of things. And, you know, these monster drinks that have become quite popular, that with much higher doses of caffeine, you know what? That's raising blood pressure. We've had patients come into the emergency department who took 2 or 3 or 4 monster drinks in a row just because they liked it. You know what? Their blood pressure skyrockets and they feel so terrible. They think they're having a stroke. They think something terrible is happening. And they come in and their blood pressure is super high, and you start questioning them and asking them what's going on. And then they, reveal, yeah, I had 3 of those monsters. And so, we call it a monster crisis. Patient come in with a monster crisis. It's happening more and more frequently.
So when you look at the effect on the population, it may not seem like caffeine is all that big a deal. And this researcher said, well, probably in the range of raising systolic blood pressure 4 points and diastolic 2 points. But although that may not sound like much, those levels across the population, so you're looking across the population, how much is caffeine raising blood pressure, would increase by 14% the number of coronary heart disease deaths, premature deaths, like from heart attack, and 20% increase risk every year deaths from stroke. So relatively small changes population-wide are major. And when we talk about preserving our own brain function, we have to put all these things on the list. So Greg, we're really pretty much by the process of elimination only left with a few options, right?
Well, and we just keep coming back to water, because water is such a healthy drink. And Dr. Chan's work here was pretty eye-opening when it came out. I remember one of the first lectures she gave, I was able to attend, on her research with water drinking and comparing in the Adventist Health Study how that looked. And look at this graph. It's pretty impressive. Those who drink greater than 5 glasses, so 6 glasses or more a day, had a reduced risk of fatal heart disease by about 50%. So in women, it was about 40% reduced risk in women and about a little bit over 50% risk in men. So daily water drinking over 6 glasses or 6 glasses or more a day, those people were much less likely to have a fatal heart attack. And that makes sense, right? You know, when is the most common time to have a heart attack? Just in the day. Early in the morning. Why? Because you're dehydrated from not having... She's drinking water there. Because you're dehydrated from not having drank anything all night long. And so we know that the more concentrated your blood from dehydration, the more likely you are to have a heart attack and a stroke. In fact, it's standard practice that if someone's coming in with a stroke, we automatically give them a bolus of 1 liter or more. Why? Because almost all stroke patients, if they're having an ischemic stroke, almost all stroke patients are dehydrated when they show up. By definition, because their blood is more thick.
Well, you say, that's why I drink all the Pepsi, Dr. DeRose. You know, it's to get that fluid benefit. Well, they found just the opposite. If you look at consumption of other beverages, it actually increased the risk of fatal heart disease. Now, we do believe there's a place for appropriate herb teas. And in fact, in the book, Greg, we speak about the benefits of a particular herbal tea for blood pressure. Tell us about that.
Hibiscus tea, yeah. Hibiscus tea, 3 cups a day of hibiscus tea lowers your blood pressure equivalent to a medication. All right, so the Central Americans and the Jamaicans, they've got it figured out. Hibiscus tea lowers your blood pressure. And the interesting thing about concentrated liquids is that the reason we think that it may increase the risk of a stroke and heart attack has to do that when you take that concentrated beverage, where there's a lot of particles in that water, and you put it in your stomach, in order for your stomach and your intestines to get the contents into your bloodstream, it has to make the concentration equivalent with what the bloodstream is. And so because of the high concentration, your body seeps some of the fluid that's in your tissues and in your bloodstream into the stomach and intestines to balance out the concentration so you can allow those particles to come in at the right concentration. That's the thinking. I think it needs more study. Oh yeah, let me go over that.
Oh, I was going to say, I looked at some of my celestial seasonings, and hibiscus is the first thing. There's some other things, but is that okay too?
Hibiscus is the most common component in herbal teas. It's not in all of them, but it's in a lot of herbal teas. You can go to, I'm sure they have many Latino-style stores here in Portland. Latino shops tend to, from Mexican background or whatever the background of the owner, they tend to have, they'll carry bags of hibiscus flowers for very low prices. And so my wife and I have bought over the years these bags, and you just take the flowers, you steep them in hot water like you would a regular tea. You get this beautiful, rich red color. It's hibiscus is kind of a sweet flavor a little bit, and we've enjoyed it. We'll make hibiscus tea, and I always know I'm doing a good thing for my body when I'm taking that, and it's a nice flavor.
Some of the dentists say it's fairly acidic, and you're probably well to brush your teeth after.
That's correct.
Drinking
Yeah,
it.
you want to be careful with your teeth with hibiscus. Yeah.
Okay, well, we could talk about a lot more, but as we finish up, we wanted to give you the floor one last time and take questions. You may have questions about any of these other areas that relate to blood pressure or something else. Greg and I are prepared to try to answer any question you have. I get first choice to answer any easy ones, and then Greg will answer all the difficult ones. No, we'll take turns here, try to share our knowledge. If we get into a jam, we've got Josiah up front, so we're not too worried. We're all at ease up here. Why am I laughing more than you, Josiah? No,
So
he's
are there
not.
any questions? Anything that's
Here, let's
on
try
your
to
mind?
let's make sure we pass around a mic. We'll give you this mic. I think we got another one too.
So I'm not sure of the source, but on the diet sodas, if you're drinking the diet soda, your mouth, up here is thinking it has something sweet, and so would that promote more insulin into the system, where that you want to eat more?
Okay, so yeah, interesting question. Do you know, Greg, is there an insulin response to sweet taste? We know that there's a cognitive, a brain component to digestion, and so just smelling food or thinking you're eating does stimulate digestive hormones and all. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, but I don't know that I've
Yeah.
actually seen that data.
It would be a small one. The insulin isn't the primary thing because the insulin takes quite a bit to really start pushing out a significant amount of insulin. So you'd have the combination of what you're experiencing in your stomach, which starts the insulin response, but then the sugar has to interact with the pancreas as well to finish that response or make it more full. And so the thing that you'll experience, though, is you'll start to have your digestive juices start to move and change, and your stomach will start to rumble more, or at least start to produce more juices from drinking the diet soft drink. And so you would, we've hypothesized that maybe that leads to overeating when we're actually eating something. Because the crazy thing about soft drinks, diet or sugar soft drinks, is that it doesn't actually change how much people eat at their meal, right? You could take a whole huge, big gulp. Back in the day, the big gulp, I don't know if they're still doing that at 7-Eleven. I haven't checked lately, but, I remember as a kid, we could go and get these huge big gulps, and you can drink that whole thing, and once the fluid is finally out of your system in about 15 minutes, or out of your stomach in about 15 minutes, you can just go and eat a regular meal, and it doesn't make any difference. All those calories are just loading up in your body, and you just eat the same amount. It's not like if you drank a 1,000-calorie drink, you're going to eat 1,000 less calories at a meal, right? You don't. You eat the same amount. So.
Yeah, this has been very well studied. So the physical form in which you take your calories has a direct relationship to how much satisfaction or satiety you get. And one of the classic studies that they did years ago was with apples. So if you eat, let's say, 300 calories of apples, you get quite a bit of satisfaction, and it lasts you quite a while. If you take those same 300 calories and you put it into apple sauce, you get much less satisfaction, and it holds you a shorter time. If you take those same 300 calories and put it into apple juice, then much, much less satisfaction, and again, you're going to be looking for something to eat much sooner, even though you ate the same number of calories. So it's an important concept when people are trying to lose weight, and it disturbs some of us because we're in an interesting time in our society, in our culture. Americans for so many years have been eating phytochemically depleted diets. They're not eating enough plant foods. So people start juicing these plants and they feel better, but the downside is you were really designed physiologically to eat those plants. So I'm not saying there's no benefit. If you're not eating fruits and vegetables and greens, well, yeah, to make a smoothie or a juice and to drink those, yes, you're going to get some benefit. But if you're trying to lose weight, you're much better off eating more of those whole plant foods in a more of their natural state. So you'll get even more benefit. And by the way, the other thing that happens when you chew food is you make a hormone called urogastrone. This is something that actually helps to heal the digestive tract. And right now, if you're not aware of it, we're in an epidemic of digestive problems in our country, such that some of the best, highest prescribed drugs are these proton pump inhibitors, the Nexiums and the Prilosec, omeprazole, and Protonix, things like this. And now we're realizing that these have serious long-term effects. So if you haven't been to your doctor lately, they're really pushing practitioners now to get patients off these drugs that everybody's been put on because of their poor dietary and lifestyle habits.
Take them off in a month, because we know that it's increasing osteoporosis rates. Vitamin B12 deficiency is becoming more of a problem. There are a couple of those drugs increase your risk of bleeding.
Stomach cancer, increased risk, yeah.
Yeah, so they're starting to realize some of these things, and it works so well to take away my digestive experience that's troubling me, but maybe it was troubling you for a reason. And maybe we should think about what that reason was, instead of just getting some Protonix or some Pepsid.
Okay, we got a question. There's a very dignified gentleman in back raising his hand. He's far back there. My vision is not that good. Is one of the senators, local senators, came in? Who is that back there? Oh, Carl.
There may be people here today who would like to maybe be a part of a group. And I know we briefly discussed this to encourage each other along this 30-day path. And maybe you have it set up either online or in your book where people can come together and encourage each other in the 30-day plan to reduce their blood pressure.
Boy, this is such a great question. Carl, you're going to have to travel with me. I need more people like you asking questions like that in the audience. We do have a plan. If you go on the CompassHealth.net website under free materials, the very first thing under free materials is how to run a blood pressure program in your community. And I'll just give you a quick overview. It requires 4 DVDs and a book. And we just so happen to have all those DVDs here, don't we, Carl? And we have special pricing on those DVDs. The basic program works like this. Every participant gets a book, and you come together and meet once a week. Each night, if you didn't get tired of hearing from Greg and me, you'll hear from either one of us or both of us on these DVDs. We start with kind of an overview of high blood pressure, then we talk about behavior change, and you basically go through then a series. We have a DVD series called Reversing Hypertension Naturally. That's kind of the core presentations. So it ends up being 8 nights, and we recommend you do it once a week. And during that time, there's assignments. It's right on that online overview, what we want the participants to read in advance of that week. If you don't read the couple of chapters that were assigned or whatever, we still want you to come. The most extensive chapter in the book, you've already had Greg and I work you through it. That 14th chapter on spiritual health is actually the longest chapter in the book.
Yeah.
And you've already had the overview here, but we do have that on DVD as well. And so Greg and I are on that. And there were some interesting moments in that live presentation that was filmed, professionally filmed, and some that did not come up here. And we kind of got in each other's face at one point, didn't we?
And we had to be very disciplined during that, because they said we have to be done at exactly this time. And so we had to be very disciplined in going through the material. And yeah, I think you got in my face a little bit.
Did I? Yeah, well,
You even stepped on my toes.
Did I actually really? Literally? Physically? Okay, well, anyway.
You can see it all on the video.
Okay, well, anyway, so basically, Carl, I don't know, are you saying that your church is going to offer that program? Are you volunteering to be the facilitator?
I was just inquiring.
You're just inquiring. Okay. Well, if there's someone here who wants to rise to the occasion, if you're not a member of this congregation and want to do it at your own church or your workplace or whatever. And so it takes 4 DVDs that are mentioned there. And then we do recommend for faith communities, we have a 5th DVD that we recommend. A lot of churches like this. I do a series where I go through the entire Gospel of Mark from a health standpoint. So I was just speaking at a church, and I wasn't speaking there, I just showed up at a church. They were having a special program, and someone came up to me, "Oh, Dr. DeRose, you don't know me, but our men's group just went through your Healing Insights from the Gospel of Mark series." So that's another series designed for like prayer meetings or Bible study. So if you want kind of a spiritual follow-up, it's also on health themes, but it's actually from a Bible standpoint. That also is available. So everything we have here tonight is on special pricing. You can wait and buy it online at CompassHealth.net. All the resources are there. It will cost you more money. You'll pay shipping, and my wife will be happier because she's the business manager. We always feel a little bit sad, though, Greg, because we go home from these events, and then we'll have people, so here, we're in Portland. We'll have people from Portland who could have bought the book or other things, and they're buying the stuff online and paying extra for it. And I guess she's happy because, she's, more money is coming into the corporation, but we'd rather save you the money. So get things here while they're at reduced prices. Question?
Wondering if, and I went to your lecture on Thursday. Have you covered any time this weekend about what is happening in the body leading to hypertension, high blood pressure?
Well, that is a fascinating topic. We do talk about it in the book, and
Yeah, let me give you just one snippet. We cover it a little more extensively in the book. So there's a number of different factors that can lead to high blood pressure. Let me just talk to you about one of them that people often don't know about. When a fetus is in the womb and a mother is going through a lot of chronic stress, the nephrons are not properly formed in the fetus. And so there's an inadequate number of nephrons that form. This is a common example.
those are the filtering units in the kidney.
And so you're going through life, you're an adult now, you're going through life, and you have less nephrons than everybody else, or at least than those who didn't have mothers with chronic stress. And you find yourself, your blood pressure at the age of 45 or 50 is starting to go up. Your lifestyle is certainly playing a role, but you started at a disadvantage because in order to get the blood through the kidney, your body has to turn up the pressure to push the blood through the kidney and force it through because there's less nephrons to do the work, less filtering units to do the work. So there's an example of high blood pressure, but there's a number of other examples of high blood pressure. High blood pressure is not just one cause. It's multiple different things causing, you could drink a lot of alcohol and drink a lot of caffeine and get very little sleep, and you could have high blood pressure and have a totally normal physiology otherwise. Does that make sense? So it depends on the details of what the person is going through, but our society specializes in setting us up with high blood pressure.
Yeah, the kidney is especially fascinating because when Greg is speaking about having more of these filtering units, it can be twice as many, okay, or half as many in a person who was stressed in the womb, which means in order to get that urine filtered, you've got to have more pressure going through because you've got half as many filtering units. But what's really fascinating, and this is where a lot of these insights came from, is in the science of transplantation. And people who had chronically high blood pressure, if their kidneys failed, and then they got a kidney from someone who had low blood pressure, their blood pressure will then become low. And so it's your kidney, which is one of the things, as Greg mentioned, multiple factors, but your kidney and its development even in utero affects your risk for high blood pressure later in life. So bottom line, lifestyle is extremely important, but there are genetic and lifestyle factors that even before you were born that can predispose you to high blood pressure. We've got about 5 minutes more before we finish. We have a question right here, and then one over here. We'll try to get both of those in. And then we're going to go back, Greg and I, when we finish, I know that I think there's going to be a few announcements after we finish. Greg and I think the pastor will have some remarks at the end and a concluding prayer. We're going to slip out to the resource table after we finish, and if you have individual questions or if you want books signed or CDs signed, DVDs, we do have the book on audiobook as well, CD. Some of you might prefer that. Go ahead.
I noticed I didn't hear you remark about sodium and sweets that contributes to high blood pressure.
Yeah, sodium, we spoke about it in some detail Thursday night. Sodium is a major factor that is contributing to high blood pressure in America and the world, and we do recommend the average person decrease their sodium consumption at least 30%, which is cutting back about a half teaspoon a day, and we explain how to do that in the book. So salt is important, and it is something worth addressing.
And 3/4 of your salt intake comes from processed and restaurant food in most people. That's the average person. You have to look at your own life and where it might be coming from. Much of the salt is hidden, that's what we're saying. They hide it in the food, and you can't even taste it because of the way it's prepared. In many cases, you don't taste that the food is salty and that it has a lot of salt in it.
Okay.
Yes, I have a question for doctor on the left, which is in front of me.
Who's on the left?
You, the one answer.
Oh,
On the
okay.
left of me, well, probably both of you. Which, I saw you have drinking the water. What kind of water are you drinking? What bottle from?
Oh,
I was kind of curious.
well, yeah. Actually, at home, I drink from from spring water because we have a well and we live out in the country. The water's been tested, which is important if you have a well. But this is really not the water that's displayed here. I actually did what they said not to do on the bottle. It said, "Do not refill this," or something, somewhere on here.
Buy another one, right?
Yeah. I actually got a gallon of spring water. Actually got a number of gallons of spring water a few days ago, or purified water, one of the two, and was filling the bottles with that.
I got curious about water. When we talk about drinking water, so many water out there bottle that they feel like Walmart, Costco, Freimeyer.
Mm-hmm.
Those we'll talk about alkaline number, the alkaline water.
Mm-hmm.
So, is this out there the machine that fill the alkaline water? Have one of you guys heard about Kangen machine
Sure.
that making water?
Uh-huh.
Are those scam or not?
Well, there's a lot of claims that have been made about alkaline waters, and it didn't take some medical sleuths to disprove some of them, because my children, probably 10 years ago, when they were all still in their teens or younger, were hearing from people who were promoting these things that if you drank this alkaline water, you couldn't get cancer because cancer cells cannot live in an alkaline environment. And then lo and behold, sadly, one of the people that was advocating this, guess what disease they got? They got cancer, and they kept drinking this water, and guess what happened to them? They died from cancer. So my children concluded that this was a false claim, because when you make these blanket statements, it's not hard to disprove them. You see, it just takes one example. If I say you can't get cancer if you drink alkaline water, and cancer can't grow if you're drinking this stuff, well, here they have a person who's drinking it and they got cancer. So they say, well, that's just not true. My whole point is, I think, from what I've seen, I think it's a very good filtering system. But I have looked at the literature some on alkaline water. The only study I was able to find in the medical research literature, and maybe Greg's seen something else on it, is that in athletes, drinking alkaline water may improve performance somewhat, because what happens, you make lactic acid when you exercise. So I'm not saying there's no benefits to it, but these far-reaching claims that it just cures all disease and things are many times greatly exaggerated. Okay, so I do recommend if that you try to get a pure source of water when you're on the road. You do the best you can, but your main source of water, I would recommend that if you're drinking from a well, the well's been tested. If you're using water from the tap, it's probably going to require some kind of filtration system, because all municipalities of any size are adding chlorine or similar, we call them halogens, bromide, and these can create other compounds that are undesirable. Even though they're good at purifying the water from infectious disease, they can create things like trihalomethanes and other compounds that you really don't want to be drinking, so use some type of filtration. Greg, I don't know if you have any other comments.
Yeah, I would just say that until there's convincing studies, as far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't spend the extra money on that. I would do a proper job of making sure the water is appropriately filtered and drink regular water, drink plain water. There's a reason why it's plain water.
Okay, well, our time has kind of slipped away from us here. I know some of you still have questions, but Greg and I are not going to just hasten off, so you can talk with us individually. If you have questions that you thought were of great import and everyone would